Welcome, everyone, to this Sales Hacker live event. We super appreciate you spending the next hour or so with us. Thank you so much for being here. We have some amazing folks here today to talk about how you can make sure you're reaching out at the right time so that you don't run into that objection that we all hate, which is that it's not the right time. So I'm super excited for you to meet our guests in just a moment. But before we get there, we're going to give people just a little bit of time to roll in and join us. So we've got almost 40 people here so far. Thank you all to everyone who's rolling in. And I'm going to do some quick housekeeping. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. Open up your chat box. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your role, or your company. If you'd like, share your LinkedIn link. We want people to feel really connected, and we'll try to keep this super interactive. So welcome, Annika. Welcome, everyone who is here so far. If you have a question for the guests, we've got a Q&A box, so please feel free to drop your questions there. There are no bad questions. We want to hear all of your questions. So let me introduce you to the person who will be facilitating today's conversation. Mohammed, thank you for running the show today. I'm really excited that you're here.
Of course. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate you setting this up.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah. So I will let you introduce yourself and the topic today, and take it away with a round of intros and to our incredible guests. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. All right, everybody. So nice to meet everybody. I'm Mohammed Kiswani. I'm an account executive here at Outreach. And so today, what we're going to talk about is really about how companies are targeting, prospects using critical data like buy signals into their day-to-day workflows so they can target the right prospects and take action at the right time. So I'm an individual rep. I don't manage anybody, but we have 3 managers here today. So I can let Casey start. Then we can go with Mike and Jupiter. Maybe intro what you do, which company you're from, and then potentially maybe even how you got to this position in terms of going from a rep to a manager. All right.
I'll kick it off.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Casey Bowman. I'm a sales manager at Crunchbase. How I got into management in general, I started my sales career at Yelp back in 2013, I think. Ripping cold calls like anybody else, right? Making about $30,000 a year when I started. Got my first taste of leadership there and kind of never looked back. So I've been in several different industries, from advertising sales, software sales, real estate sales, IT sales, right? Like you name it, I've touched them all. And I tried to take all of that information to Crunchbase with me and help build the sales process going forward. So excited to be here. And then I will popcorn it over to my counterpart, Mike.
Hello, my name is Mike Lamelli. I'm a sales manager at Crunchbase as well. A little background, how I actually got started. I love this question because we all, it's always unique how people land in these spots. Actually started out in accounting. So I hope there's someone else on the call who worked for one of the big 4 and is smirking at the screen because they do one busy season and realize it's not for them. So through a friend of a friend, got the opportunity to jump into sales. That's where I kicked off my career at a company called GoGrid. They competed with someone like Rackspace at the time. Fast forwarding a little bit to 2016, Crunchbase actually reached out to me to see if I wanted to become the first account executive. So I was super excited about the opportunity. A lot of what's coming into the product to date was the vision that the CEO actually, showcased during my interview process. So sold for 4 years, and over the last year or so, have transitioned into management. And very much like Casey, just really love building and helping improve the sales team. And I will popcorn over to Jupiter.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet all y'all. Thanks for giving your intros there. My name is Jupiter Bruner. I'm a sales development team lead here at Outreach, so I manage a team of around 6 to 9 SDRs in our corporate segment, or our mid-market segment. And I got started here in the sales world. After graduating from college, I went to work for the Seattle Mariners in their ticket sales department, selling season tickets and suites and all that kinds of stuff, and convincing people to see some mediocre baseball. It was a blast. But obviously, when COVID came around, not a lot of tickets were being sold. So I decided to change industries, and I figured if I was going to work for a sales company, I might as well learn how to do it right at a company that's making a living out of it. So I decided to go work at Outreach as an SDR. And then after around a year in the SDR role, I moved into a managerial capacity. And yeah, that's where we are now. So that's, I guess, been managing for around 8 months now. So still got a lot to learn, but I'm excited to chat today and share what we know thus far.
I think it's worth adding that Jupiter has definitely set up some great calls with sports teams at his time as an SDR. So that should not go unnoticed by any means. And I just realized, thanks for all of you. I think I forgot to make an intro in terms of like how I got into sales. So I'm gonna give a quick snapshot for myself. I actually became a barber at age 19. Just ran the family, did that for about 5-6 years, and then ended up having one of my clients recruit me to be an SDR at DocuSign in Seattle. So I said, you know what, let me give it a shot. Might as well see what it's all about. Didn't look back. Ended up going public with them back in 2018, and then after that, I met Outreach, and that's kind of where the story ended. And now I'm doing mid-market / enterprise sales in the East Coast territory, helping companies in my book of business to improve their sales workflows. All right, so in terms of kind of kicking it off here, the first question we have for the team here is really, how are you currently determining which of your accounts are in market so that your reps are reaching out at the right time with the right message? Who'd like to take that first question on?
We can take it on, but I think too there's a poll that went out as well, so we'd love to hear feedback from everyone in the room too in terms of what your team is looking at. I think for us at Crunchbase, I think the industry is obviously very important along with the type of teams that are involved. Obviously with Crunchbase, naturally we are really focused on selling to sales teams. So if a company has a sales team, chances are that's within market. But obviously still we're looking for teams that are prioritizing sales and they want to grow that and scale that, right? So that's kind of our take on it, but Mike, curious if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, and one other thing too, which we'll showcase a little bit later today, is for us, there's a lot within Crunchbase that we do get to leverage, and we're going to talk about, which is super exciting. But there's a ton of signals we actually bring into kind of our workflow to better understand and really be intelligent when we're starting to think about who we want to go after and how we want to approach these things. Because now in this world, a lot of it has to come down to personalization and customization. So you can't just be super generic. It does tend to get kind of pushed away, and the signals that I'm going to showcase later this will be able to really bring to life how you can go and get in front of the people at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on top, like I think where the Outreach has made a lot of success is like as we know that we found an industry that worked really well with. We found that we worked really well with software, but as we've continued to grow and as we've continued to identify like different areas and markets that we needed to like penetrate into, less of it came from specifically the industry itself, but more so identifying, hey, where does this workflow, like where does an actual outbound sales motion really sit? And I think a bunch of companies are recognizing right now that there's the industry that you're looking for. It's a piece of the pie, but that's why we decided to add the workflow portion underneath it. Is that within there, like if you're unsure about the industry or unsure like whether this will actually be a great fit, if you can identify like, hey, this is a direct selling model, or this is a model that I think would actually be a really beneficial like a use case for our product, a ton of it really comes from there, and then being able to spin up different use cases from there and think of a hypothesis going into each one that you can work with. And a lot of it starts with us by like the industry and the workflow as well.
I think there's all some great points there. I think coming from like an outbound perspective, when you think about Jupiter managing an SDR team, getting those initial conversations, what kind of triggers are you seeing are really getting VPs are getting emails 50, 60, 70 a day? What are you seeing that's getting them to convert from using Crunchbase or using other data online? What is getting them to really take a meeting and show that the rep has done the right research on those triggers?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it comes from like differentiation from the outset. And so I think we always talk about like pattern interrupts and things like that. Like, the classic example is like when a company receives funding. It's like, okay, cool. Yeah, you receive like 50 million in funding. Like you get a bajillion SDRs reaching out to all these people saying the same thing, like, hey, give us your money, give us your money. But and then you pitch your product, and then you could say like, hey, congrats on the funding. Anyway, here's this. Whereas if you can tie in just like in every single one of those press releases about funding, there's always like, hey, they're receiving 50 million in funding to focus on this, this, and this. You say, hey, I saw that your company's receiving funding to focus on these 3 initiatives. Considering your role as Mike, as your senior manager of sales, I'm assuming that this ties into your role this way. Here's how we can help you do that. It's about taking that extra step there. So instead of just having the idea to start with like, hey, I saw you received funding. Anyway, here's my product. Give me your money. It's like, obviously that's extreme hyperbole there, but the outset is that you want to differentiate yourself simply by like kind of doing some of the work for them. Don't make the prospect have to figure out exactly how your product's going to help them. Tell them. And if you're wrong, they'll let you know. But at the beginning, like, you want to show some effort so that there's some sweat equity that you're exercising that they can recognize on their own as well. And then you can meet in the middle somewhat. And it has a huge, huge effect on getting some interest on the front end as well throughout the deal cycle as well. Those deals are far more likely to close, which I'm sure Mike and Casey could talk through as well, about like how when there is like a consistent value prop built out from like a hypothesis that has been showcased through some of these buyer signals, it's a way, way, way higher likelihood that it's going to close at the end of the day.
Totally, Jupiter. I think, just kind of from a rep perspective on my end, not managing a team and whatnot, but I know the most successful meetings I've booked have been when I take like a hypothesis and kind of put that in my intro saying, hey, look, like, here's what I think you're focused on, because I've sold to people in that persona. I say, look, I've seen these are common challenges. And these are things that I think you may be facing given, you're the manager of sales operations or leading a team doing this right now. These 3 areas may be things you're struggling with. And is this right? Would it be worth a conversation? I think that definitely does take it a step further, showing them, like you said, it's not a generic blast email. It's show me that you care and know what I'm dealing with so I can give you my time back. What do you think, Mike and Casey, I'm assuming your reps are also doing a lot of outbound prospecting, booking their own pipeline. Can you share, some success and things that you're seeing is actually working in terms of breaking into those meetings from those targeted triggers?
Yeah. Oh, go for it, Casey.
Okay. I think Jupiter's spot on. I think where success is in customization. And it doesn't, I think people think it has to take 40 minutes an account. It really doesn't. I think there's like a couple of things you can do that are incredibly quick that give the same result. The first is every single website has a mission statement on it. If you can somehow tie that into your outreach, chances are they're going to notice that you did a little bit of homework. So if that mission statement, for example, says like, oh, we look to make our employees' lives easier, we care about our employees, you can tie that into your sales tool, which would make their job easier. Or another really good one is like job postings in general, right? If they're hiring a ton of SDRs and I work at outreach, right? My first instinct is going to be to reach out to that company because they're prioritizing outbound. Those things take 2 seconds. You can find them pretty easily. You're not wasting a ton of time, but those are buying signals, right? If you know that a company prioritizes their employees and how easy their life is at the general in that company, or something as simple as job postings for something that your tool specifically helps with, I think that's a really quick and easy way to show that customization, but also highlight what are absolutely buying signals.
Yeah, and one quick thing to add to that as well is like, I think Jupiter hit the nail on the head is like, you have to tie into what the business is doing and what that person is doing as well, and marry those two very well. Because if you're only just reaching out to this person saying, buy my product, and they don't actually understand how it's going to impact the business as a whole, and then how you're actually going to help that individual in that role, again, those emails tend to go to spam or be blocked much quicker than if you're reaching out and you really have done a little bit of homework. And again, it's really about being efficient. You can't spend, if a rep comes back and says, oh, I spent 6 hours researching this one account, like that's not super efficient. So it's how can you be efficient, get the data points you need, and then marry that customization and personalization so that person at least feels like, hey, they did their homework, right? Even if you think about, say, something like, Spotify, like our Discover Weeklies are probably all different. And that's super impactful because it feels like it's talking to me. And that's how, our reps treat our outbound is there has to be personalization into it. You can't do the spray and pray model and hope that they're going to reply back. You really need to go in and do some due diligence before reaching out.
So some great points there from all three. What do you think, if you were to say what you're seeing as sales team doing wrong as it comes to reaching out about the wrong things, for example, what do you think is causing them to get things like not the right time, we're not interested?
Yeah, I can hop in here to start. A lot of something I talk about with my reps all the time is like, especially when you're starting out, is you always want to have like a lens of like kind of ROI on effort as you're starting out. It's like, hey, so with all the investment that you're putting in being the effort and the payout, the return being whatever you use for your quota attainment, everyone's got a different thing. But I think a common mistake that a lot of people make is they'll either over-index way too hard on the personalization side or do none at all. And they think that they're mutually exclusive. It's like there's like, and I mean, I feel like we're kind of saying the same thing. I guess I'm realizing halfway through the sentence, but there's a really a happy medium there. And I think a biggest mistake is that, as you can see with like buy signals, like going down rabbit holes, you can get lost trying to find the right information. You could spend like an hour and a half writing an email to a prospect only to have them say like, hey, this is my last week at the company. I don't want to talk to you guys anymore. It's like, oh, thank you, awesome. So like being able to like recognize like, hey, there's the investment that you're putting into this effort, this is like a resource, and this return you're getting is like is you have to think about like where are you fitting in the middle there, and there's such thing as too much personalization when it comes to like if it's drastically affecting your productivity, and there's definitely such thing as not enough. And so like where can you marry the two and where can you meet in the middle there? It's up to you and like your own like day-to-day workflow, but you have to figure out a way to do both, because if not, you're missing a huge slice of the pie.
Yeah, one thing to add to that as well, I'm going to share my screen in a second just to give some visuals. I know after a long weekend, it's always good to see something and get excited about. But I love this image I'm about to showcase, and the reason for that is I call it death by 1,000 tools. So let me pull this up really quick. All right, can you see that all?
Yep.
Perfect. So this visualization is super fantastic for me, and the reason for that is right now we have so much we're working within. We're almost tab surfing, I call it. Like reps go into this tool, that tool, and we're not actually extracting that small bits and pieces of information we need. As Jupiter is saying, we really have to be efficient once we get into these various tools. And this is a workflow of what an AE, you know, Mohammed, I hope you're kind of laughing at this, saying, yeah, I do have to do all these things on a daily basis.
And more.
and more, and reporting, and SFTC, and all this stuff. And it just shows like, we have so much out there at our fingertips, but we're not using them because it's not really all consolidated. And so if we can consolidate some of this information, have it at our fingertips, get that personalization and reach out, that's where we're going to find some magic happen. But right now it's just we're here, we're there, we're updating, we're back to this, we're getting writing a new email, updating one, and like all this different stuff, and it's just wasting time as we kind of go and surf through the different tabs, and a lot of people feel that. So I think this is another common theme we're seeing, is just there's too much that we kind of need to reel back in, you know, especially as managers, say, do we actually need all this stuff in front of us?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mike, and I think that my last kind of point on this as well is that if you've done your due diligence and you find a company that is within the ICP, has everything in line for what you think would be a perfect fit for your company, you're going to get responses that say it's not the right time. And so many times people are like, okay, bye, right? Like on to the next. I think that's honestly what VPs of sales and the people that you're reaching out to are looking for, is that person who's going to come back at you and say, actually, after speaking with dozens of people in your role, it actually is the right time, and here's why. I think leaning into the no is actually something that we forget to do a lot of times, because we're so hyper-focused on moving on to the next best thing. If you know it's a good fit and you see the bias signals that we've researched, you know, via Crunchbase and funding or job postings or whatever, like lean into that and give them a reason to find the time, right? I think so many times people will respect that more than just saying, okay, thanks, bye, on to the next one. Lean into that and then use that as for, you know, the reason why you can make them get time back in their day. Hey, I know it's not the right time right now, but this will save you X amount of time, or this will save you X amount of dollars, and here's why. That could be compelling to keep that conversation going.
I think that's a great point. I think, you know, it does ring a bell for me, because a lot of times I know this company like needs our product, needs our service. And if they said no last year, 6 months ago, there's usually things that made them say no. Maybe too much bandwidth, not able to take on a new project. But like you said, using those triggers, which we'd love to see more of, like Mike, what triggers you actually do look at. You know, hey, I noticed that you said no last year, but right now, like you said, you're hiring a bunch of SDRs and your role description now says this. It leads me to believe that you're prioritizing these 4 things. And I've done this for many companies, and they've bought from us and they've seen this value. You know, I think now's a better time. Am I off here? And I think they'll respect that, because they know that you're actually caring about their company, looking at what's happening in their business, and coming to them with more of a cohesive, even if it's just a hypothesis, but like an opinion around where you think you could add value. Helping versus selling, I like to call it.
Yeah, you're spot on, right? It's a natural filter to be like, I'm not interested, or it's not the right time. So after that filter's over, if you're one of the last people standing and responding, even better chance for you.
I love it. So if we get into some of the signals here, I mean, I don't, maybe Mike or Casey, if it's around specifically, you know, like what Crunchbase offers, or even Jupiter, what what your team uses. I'm actually curious if you were to rank them in terms of the actual signals, what works the best. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts. I know it's different depending on what you're selling, but what kind of signals would you say are really working the best these days?
Yeah, so I'll kind of kick it off and then popcorn around. But you know, I think for us, really have just kind of zooming out. Really, what we've started with is this account-based approach. So we always, again, start with those accounts and identify who do we want to go after. Within that, that's where we start to really drill a little bit deeper. And some of the signals we use are, you know, funding is a great one. I think a lot of people can recognize that one and say, okay, they're going to start to grow and understand, to Jupiter's point, like, why are they going to grow? Is it a new product launch? Is it their Series E and they're just lighting, you know, fuel on the fire to add a bunch of salespeople? Is it Series B? So you do have to kind of take that into consideration. You know, leadership hires, right? Are they hiring new people coming on board? Generally, when that does occur, there's going to be some changes, and someone wants to come in and take a second look and start to do some evaluations. And that's a great signal to say, great, okay, I'm gonna reach out to this person and get an understanding, even if it's 3 to 6 months down the road. At least you can get on their radar and say, hey, let's have these conversations now while you are doing some of that evaluation. We do have, within the Crunchbase platform specifically, we do have some third-party data providers. So we work with G2 Tech Stack. So that's basically looking at the software products being used by companies. Let me just really quickly show some visuals for folks so they can understand what it looks like, because it is very, very exciting. So pulling this up. Here on the screen, you know, we're looking at the company Stripe, for example. You can actually see which products Stripe is using and whether those products are active or removed, right? So these are great signals for us. We can go into the platform and quickly say, hey, you know, let's go look up some of our competitors, see if they're active, and then go get, you know, that is a key for us. Say, yes, they're already using something like us. Now it's about showing the value to that person. And then going one step further, is we have signals and news. So we can easily identify if there's leadership hires and go through our news feed and instantly start to paint a story for that person and say, hey, you got funding, you have leadership hires, and you're launching a new product. Like, that looks really compelling to that person when we send that email. So for us, those would probably be the biggest ones that we use on a daily basis.
This is awesome, Mike. Yeah, I think some of the questions coming in now are like, how do you look up companies' tech stack? So this is something that comes with the Crunchbase platform, right? Using third-party tools? Yeah,
so we partner with a variety of, and if I go back, we partner with a variety of different providers. So we have G2 Tech Stack, we have IP Query, we have Aberdeen, which is IT spend. Again, these aren't going to be 100% like perfect, but directionally it helps you paint that story when you go and reach out. SEM Rush, which is website traffic. Like, if website traffic is going up, that is a signal that you probably want to start, you know, there's a lot of traffic going in. If G2 Tech Stack showcases that they're adding all these products, if Privco, you can go do some deeper financials and understand their valuation. And of course, Aberdeen, IT tech spend, like, that is really, you know, the gold. These signals are our weapons as reps when we go into battle. They are our best friend. And the more you know, I don't care if you started sales today or you've been doing this for 30 years, it's all about preparation. And if you have this information, you go into a call, it just showcases that we're on their side, not we're pitching to them. And so that's the biggest one. But again, to answer the question, it's through the Crunchbase platform.
I love that. That's awesome stuff. Did you all see the question from Brandon Johnson about outbound sales teams and balancing research versus time of dials? It's in the panel. I think Jupiter.
Yeah.
That question is speaking to you. Anyone else can answer, of course, but I'd love to get your thoughts first on that.
Yeah. So you bring up a great point, Brandon. This actually. So when I was an SDR, like Mohammed said, I found I had a knack for reaching out to the sports accounts. I had a really good story that worked really well. I was like, hey, this industry, I know how they work. I know how they tick. It's solid. Like I know who the right people to go after. I know like when the right time to talk to them is, and that was extremely helpful. And so, Brandon, what you're mentioning is like when you have this knowledge and when you're just building out this team and you know exactly this industry you're reaching out to, you know the personas you're reaching out to, you don't need as much like account research on the front end because you quite frankly you know like what this is going to work and you're going to be able to know how to speak their language. I think what the theme is here is that like as you're reaching out to all these companies, you got to be able to figure out like you want to come in knowing like exactly how you can help them. And if you already know, or if you already have a solid idea, then yeah, you don't need as much research time on the front end. You want to spend as much time having those conversations because then in those times you're going to learn a lot more and all your reps are going to learn a lot more as well. Where it's gonna you might have some troubles like so once those deals are started, it's really solid because all your reps are going to know exactly where to reach out to and like how to break down the overall cycle because they're really familiar with the industry. However, breaking through the noise, a lot of it comes with being able to speak the language of that team. So I often say like that's Casey mentioned this earlier, going through the job postings, seeing like even the titles of the people that they're hiring, the name, like how they like refer to the certain instruction in their day to day, small things, speaking their language kind of interrupts that pattern on the front end. And then if you're already really familiar with the industry, you're going to have a lot more solid of a call on the front end because you can kind of go back and forth. And like Casey said, like when they say like, hey, I'm not interested, it's like, well, actually in every single other conversation I'm having today, this person's saying this. Is this true for you? Well, yeah. Okay, cool. Let's talk about it. So you have a huge advantage, but where I think you can really double down on, Brandon, is referencing that like you can figure out exactly where like the SDRs are going to be able to kind of interrupt that pattern on the front end. And then after that, once you're going back and forth, you're right. You don't need as much account research on the back end because you're pretty familiar with how the company and industry works.
Awesome. Looks like Brandon found some value in the answer there. The only thing I'd actually add to that from my perspective is just as an outbound rep, showing some relevance and personalization to show that you care and know them in the first message makes a big difference. Everyone knows when they get put in an automatic sequence, it's obviously easy and takes time. It takes away time necessary to do it. But, going the extra mile to show like, hey, like where they worked, why you think it's relevant, sending a custom video, sometimes it does get in that first meeting, if you know that you can definitely sell to them, it's just a matter of getting them actually hooked. And so that extra effort, Brandon, maybe on the first touch, and then keep bubbling up that to the top of their inbox, that could be worth the effort, in my opinion. But I think that's the only feedback I have, other than what Jupiter said. Anything, Mike, in case you want to add there?
One thing I would add is when I was working with outbound teams, I would have people reach out to the same persona that day. So you're reaching out to, I don't know, an HR person from 10 different companies, but that way it was the same sort of things that they were looking for. Your talk track was the same, your customization was a little bit different. And sometimes when you're an SDR or you're outbound rep, you're talking to a VP and then you're talking to an SDR and then you're talking to a people person. It's like, you can kind of get your talk track mixed up. But if you spend, 10 in a row of speaking to just head of people, and the next 10 is just finance or whatever the case is from different companies, of course, but at least your talk tracks will be the same and your points will be the same. And that way you can kind of speed up that process while obviously still doing your customization, but at least your brain is still working the same way for those 10 calls or whatever it is in a row.
I like that. Being efficient with your time and just knocking it out without changing it just takes time for the brain to kind of go back and forth to different personas and do different things. For sure. Okay. Cool. Let's see here. What other questions that we have? Is there anything else that you wanted to show, Mike, from the Crunchbase perspective? I was curious.
No, those were the biggest ones. I think again, the signals for us is as we can go in and really just layer on top, third-party data providers to make our outreach much more efficient are the bigger ones.
I guess the question I have for you from like an AE perspective, how I guess when you're working more enterprise accounts, enterprise deals, kind of bigger value accounts, things do change, right? Funding comes in frequently. What's kind of best practice for the workflow? Are reps taking this information, putting it in like an account plan of some sort? Are they using Crunchbase as the account plan in a sense? What can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, great question. So for us, which is really nice, and again, speaking to kind of our specific workflow,
Right.
As you start to progress to those larger and larger accounts, you definitely need to start account mapping, right? Because there's multiple different people you're going to be working with. Is it procurement? Is it your champion? But the champion might have to go and present to a committee internally. So it's really about account mapping and understanding what's at play. Within the Crunchbase platform as well, though, we have the ability to go and leave notes and tags. So for us, we can basically go in there on profiles. So if we were to look at that, I showcase that stripe, I can go and leave, notes to Casey. So when she actually goes and looks at that stripe profile as well, she's able to pick up that same information. So, when our AEs and our SDRs work together to either break into accounts or to grow them, we often leave our trail behind. So that way, whoever can go in can actually help with that as well and push things along. And then for us, we use Salesforce. That is our CRM of choice, and it is a two-way street. So we can actually go and understand accounts, filtering information, last activity, who worked that account, all from the Crunchbase platform. And so it's very nice that we're kind of in this. We only have to live in two worlds for the moment. But we can get a lot of the information just at our fingertips from, again, either the notes or actually diving into Salesforce itself.
Got it. No, it's definitely helpful for sure. What about you, Jupiter, from your perspective? How are SDRs doing it, specifically with like high volume? I'm assuming they're not all doing account plans with us as AEs. How are they kind of getting that and aggregating it? So maybe in outreach?
Yeah, so a lot of the information you want to store, you want to keep it in one kind of source of truth, like one area where there's less hopping around or tab surfing, as Mike would like to say, which I thought was awesome. Yeah, I mean, as far as like the compilation of all the information, it's really tough, especially as you're in the SDR world and in sales in general. There's a ton of turnover of accounts. And so like accounts are being moved around a ton. And so like you, especially in the commercial and enterprise space, like you have these huge, massive organizations with a bunch of like multi-threading going on and a lot of context required. A lot of that comes with within like the actual, like you said, like account notes within the platform, and then also utilizing some form of communication between the AE and SDR as well. Is tough. I think an area we're trying to work on a lot in our teams is kind of keeping alive, because I feel like everyone always kind of reverts to like Google Sheets or like Excel docs to kind of keep all the account plans in one place, and they get solid, but they're static, or say that person leaves the company and every single account plan that they have is just gone. So identifying ways to keep things in more consistent spaces is really, really important when it comes to like the aggregation of all the information. I think I wanted to identify one thing too. I think a quick little change. So I think we've done a lot of talk about like personalization and like on the front end and like the research and how to integrate that into the front end. There's always the question though, is like how do you, like, is it worth it to keep the personalization in throughout the rest of the outreach, for lack of a better word, like throughout the actual rest of the sequence, like all these emails that you're writing, like if you see that they're not reading the first email, why does it make sense to continue to personalize throughout, like time and time again? Is that a good use of your time? And I think something I wanted to touch on today, as we're talking about like kind of utilizing the buyer signals to the best of your ability, there's a huge like a bunch of data that always points to like that first email. You want to have as much research personalization as possible. That first phone call, you want to be able to like you reference that email because it's a lot easier for you. But as the email, like the touch points go on and on, the actual impact of a lot of the personalization lessens pretty significantly. And so it's important to recognize, like if you're building out these sequences and you're building out these outbound campaigns, as you get to the later touch points in the sequence, it's important to recognize that the more automation isn't necessarily a bad thing, because what you're doing is you can then reference or like reply to the initial email that you did send, because at that point you're just kind of doing the same task over and over again. And like as we're going back to like that ROI lens that we're always talking about, like this effort, this investment that I'm putting in, all this research, like if this is the 8th email and they haven't opened the first 7, is it really worth it to like do a bunch of research on the company again and find a new value prop? Like probably not. Like what you could throw something a little more generic in there to do somewhat of a Hail Mary at the end. And so I think it's important, as we're talking about like buyer signals and like workflows and how to structure it on the outbound side. If you're like the front end, the personalization is really, really important. But as you get to the latter half of the sequence and the touch points, they get the effect of them gets slightly lessened. So it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Jupiter, it's a great point right there, because as reps we sometimes spend a lot of time reaching out, and the reality is if you put so much effort on the first touch, why not follow up on it and bring that up to the top of their inbox versus doing it all over again, and maybe not stopping if you should be stopping with the personalization later on. So I think it's a great touch point there.
Yeah.
Quick pause. Do we have any questions from the audience today? Maybe things you'd like us to touch on, topics, just general questions you'd like us to double tap on. We'll give you a chance to comment in the chat. Personalizing later on. Jupiter, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that was the idea that we're talking through there. I guess, Mike and Casey, what are your all's thoughts about like later on personalization in like the sequence on the back end there? Like does your team still do it? Do you see a positive effect from it, or do you tend to slow down on the personalization on the back end to kind of let more volume go out? Like, what's your philosophy there?
I think it depends is the short answer, right? But I think that for me, I completely agree with you on the sense that there's no point, especially with tools like Outreach, when you can see if people are opening emails or not opening emails, right? If they haven't opened your first 3, then why are you spending 20 minutes putting an email together? So like, I agree with you on that front. What I think is sometimes more impactful are really short emails, something that people aren't used to seeing. So something as simple as like, hey, like, is this of any interest? Like, just something that's just a short, unlike anything they would be receiving. I think that's like a good thing to throw in that mix. But in terms of personalization later down the funnel, sometimes what I like to do is like, to Mike's point, when we're writing tags in Crunchbase or Salesforce or whatever, we're tagging things. One of the things I like to tag is the value point I use in the first email of that sequence. So if the value point I use in the first half of that sequence is funding and I'm not getting anywhere, maybe I try a different value point. So maybe that second value point that I'm trying is you just hired a new VP of sales, right? Or maybe the other one, or this is my personal favorite, is what I like to do is I like to look up where they went to college, figure out the college bar in that town, reference it, right? And just ask for a meeting, right? Like doesn't matter what the value point is, just make sure you're tagging it and logging it in the CRM or the platform of your choice. So that way you can say, hey, this is what I used before and it didn't actually work. I didn't get anywhere with it. So let me try this one, but continuing to log it. So that way, if I pass that account to Mike, he knows like, hey, they don't respond to funding stuff. They don't respond to this, but they respond to XYZ. So I think it's important to note that to change it up as you go down the funnel.
I think it's some great stuff, Casey, and I think that kind of touched on the anonymous attendee question, 1136 too as well. Like how do you keep it relevant as well? So to recap that, reference what you said in the first time. You can automate the follow-ups, but maybe make them shorter, and then reference things that you think are maybe non-first pick, like where they went to school, something like that, and then be very direct with the ask, and maybe like you said, like maybe email like you text, right? Like, hey, do you want to talk about this? Versus having to send a whole new paragraph that's maybe not personal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big thing also with like how to automate that and the ending portion, so you're still able to add that. Something that's really commonplace in Outreach, and I know a lot of other companies do this as well. But it's a simple idea, but it's sequences by persona, and so like specifically having these like if you're reaching out to, at least at Outreach, like the pitch that you give to a marketing leader as opposed to a sales operations leader is drastically different. And so if you're putting them in the same generic email sequence, that front end, that first email is going to have a bunch of personalization. However, if they're in the 6th email in the sequence and you're talking about like something that only applies to a sales persona, but it's going to a marketing leader and a sales ops leader, they're like, who is this guy? Like, he has no idea what I'm doing. However, if you can create these sequences on the front end, and by like kind of narrowing down these specific personas that you sell to, and like even if you want to go even further than that, like we talked about that earlier, like industry as well, you can create these things so these automated touches that are going out at the end are actually pertinent to their industry and for like their specific role that they're in. And it's a really, really quick way to scale out what the whole idea is. That there's an ability that you have that people always think like, okay, I'm gonna have one sequence and like this is gonna be my sequence that I'm gonna use every day. It's like, no, dude, you got like a million. Like, just use the ones that are best for your specific personas, and you can tweak them and see which one's working, which ones aren't by using. I mean, I'm now kind of going into the sales engagement platform pitch. Anyways, But yeah, the way to kind of position exactly like how to have more personalization on the back end is by breaking it out by persona, and then even if you want to go further, persona and industry is going to really, really help a ton.
Yeah, I think Jupiter, like, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Like, for sales reps, like, our biggest weapon internally too is being organized. And that means even doing the cadences to understanding your ICP, and then, the industries as well, if you can break them out in those three. But like, as you go and do your day-to-day, if you're organized and you're doing it, as Casey said too, you're kind of understanding and focusing on that same person, and you're doing it chunks at a time, it becomes such a more natural swing versus hopping around. And then that's where you start to get a little bit of that pain, because you're like, I gotta tweak it to this, I gotta tweak it to that, and you start to lose that momentum. Everything in sales to me is all about momentum and how you can continue on and scale that out. And I think, Jupiter, that was a really great point, is really just being, to me, organized within your day-to-day, and even, in an outreach sequence, for example, of having it aligned. So when you go and do that, it's already top of mind versus having to kind of scour, and look at everything all over again.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly.
What do y'all think about Dave Perry's question regarding that cadence of outreach? I know for me personally, I tend to like a lot of video, like short 30-second videos, because it's very personalized, the first touch. And then, have a variety of calls if that video gets opened, like triggering calls to follow up, because I know calls are very effective for converting. But of course, I think it's going to depend on what you're selling, who you're selling to, your persona, if they're very receptive to, LinkedIn versus emails. What are your thoughts, Casey and Mike, Jupiter, regarding the best cadence that you've seen success with in the past 6 months?
I'll throw like a crazy thing out there, which had a lot of success for cold. I mean, we did this to progress deals as well, but also used it for cold outreach. Our cameos, like, we would do research on people's Instagrams and find out that they were huge Niners fans, and then we would have Jimmy G send them a personalized cameo as to why they should take our call. You don't do this for everyone, obviously, right? But we would write the script and we would make it, funny, right? But I would say the response rate was 90%, right? They might say no to the meeting, but they'd be like, that was the best thing I've gotten. I shared it with the entire team internally, right? So it's something that you don't do it for everyone, obviously, because they're $50 to $100 a pop. But I think it was Jupiter was maybe talking about it. When you look at an account, you're like, yes, this is our ICP. I know they need us. They're using our competitor. Do it, try it, because honestly, we saw a ton of success doing it. They're hilarious, and it's memorable, if nothing else.
Yeah,
that's what we need. Things that are just new and different, and you got to stand, different from everybody else, right? So if that's what gets someone to open a reply, it's funny. I had one where I think it was during Thanksgiving or something. One of my colleagues had a company send a video, a funny video, and then they just tagged the prospect, and she replied as a comment and said hey, this is hilarious, I'll take a meeting. Some weird stuff like that just tends to work.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to finance about getting some more budget for cameos ASAP.
Right.
I think the average sequence that we do at Outreach typically starts with a manual email, and then it's followed up with a call, then a LinkedIn task, then a follow-up email, then a call. And then after that, Sam Nelson has a lot of really, really good content. Specifically, he refers to it as the Agoge sequence, AGOGE. He's put a lot of good content on LinkedIn, specifically breaking down what that sequence looks like. The idea behind it is that the first email you write, you can then kind of use it as a script on the call. So you add some of that personalization, that relevant info. You can then use that as you're kind of ripping through 80 calls in an hour. No, just kidding. 80 calls in 2 hours. Sorry. The idea is you're going to have a hard time remembering all that, but having some form of notes or some email that you can refer to makes it a lot easier, because then you can also reference it on the call as well, and they can pull it up as they're looking at it. I'm also a fan, if you know, similar to Brandon's question earlier, if you know exactly how you're going to help them, and you already have that idea, and you could spend the time writing it out an email, or you could just call them real quick. That's also not a bad idea. A lot of the sequences that I would make would have a call on the front end. If I knew exactly what I was going to say, I had my idea, my script built out in my head. I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to call this person, because you're broken record. You're now my rep, so I just keep talking about these ROI lens. But it's okay, I could spend 15 minutes writing this email and make sure it's solid, or I could spend 5 minutes having a discount phone call. And if I get the same result, what's better here? But I think a lot of the time, obviously, either they don't pick up, or if you still need to do a lot of research and you want to make sure that you say the right stuff and like it pop to the top of their inbox, then that's why on average we tend to start with email, call, LinkedIn, email, call, and then mostly calls after that.
Yeah.
Jupiter, another good thing to touch on that you mentioned, and I think is really helpful that we put in outreach sequences in some prior companies I've worked with, is the front half of that first email be like, hey, I'm going to call you in the next 20 minutes. And you'd be surprised how many people will immediately email and be like, don't call, right? We're like, but they'll respond, but they'll look at it, right? But I think it's just something that, A, when you call, it's like, hey, I told you I was going to call. Did you see my email? Or B, they're going to respond to that email being like, I'd rather you not. But like, at least as a conversation, at least you have something open. But to that cadence and like the way you were talking about it, it's an easy way to kind of get a little bit more conversation going.
I think these are all great answers. At the end of the day, it's all going to go down to what works in your industry and your business. You know, I know some people sell products to like engineers, and these guys never pick up the phone. And so, in that perspective, you know, are they more email receptive, right? Some people just don't even have a LinkedIn profile or don't even open LinkedIn. Probably not a sales leader, right? But if you're in that situation, is sending LinkedIn videos or messages really going to work, and tagging them? Probably not. So I think to answer Sophie's question about that, I think customization. So was that Dave? Yeah, Dave for sure. Really depends on, you know, who you're selling to. A/B testing, again, not a plug for outreach, but we do offer A/B testing too. So figuring out like subject lines. I think that was a question for Letitia. You know, what works best? I tend to put their name. Hey, like, you know, Letitia, you know, your reps, you know, quotas next month. Something that makes them open it, because the goal of a subject line is meant to have them open the body. And the goal of a body is to have them reply. And so if you think of it very, very small like that, just keep it very, very simple. You want them to open the email. Don't put, how are you doing today? Hope the weekend's going well, because they can't see what's in the actual email. Just type in, Letitia, you know, heard this happen here. What do you think about this? It'll be a lot more likely to open because you're personalizing off of something and keeping the subject line good. I did want to add one more thing too regarding those 1-2 touch points. One thing I saw a lot of success on doing recently was after making a call, like I have a call task, and then if it goes to voicemail, there's an automatic sequence email that goes out that just says, hey, just give you a ring. No need to call me back. Just check your email or something of that nature, but it's tied to a voicemail or a call going unanswered. So if you're looking for efficiency, could be a great way to have these easy touch points and not have to do so much manual work.
For those who are looking for the kind of the blueprint of or that Aggregation sequence, it looks like Sam shared that LinkedIn post in the chat. So that for those who want to take a look at that, it's super helpful, and it has like an Excel sheet breaking down what each touch point is and how to structure it. And that's relatively what we follow on outreach as well.
Do we have any more questions? I know we're coming up on towards our end of time here. I think we covered the majority of what we want to talk about, unless Mike, Casey, or Jupiter, anything else you wanted to kind of plug in at the end there or make sure we cover.
No, this was great. Thanks everyone for letting us chat your ears off.
I'm going to jump in here, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. This has been incredible. And if anyone is like, I need to go back and find something that either Mike showed or that somebody referenced, we're recording this and we're going to send it out within 24 hours. So you're going to have the chance to go back and grab anything you need. But I really appreciate you, Mike, Casey, Jupiter, Mohammed, for moderating. This has been really fantastic, and I hope you all have an incredible Tuesday.